Done.
Okay. I don't know. Sudi's here and Sudi's on the agenda. I'll put the agenda up on the screen just so people can see what's what and the topics.
So Kiran, so maybe I have one. I asked a question on the Slack, but I want to clarify how we are going to run these meetings, right? Because if you don't mind, because see, I was under the impression. I'll share with you what I put on Slack, right? So we built all this user story, right? So I was under the impression that we were going to discuss them and then see what elements needs to be added or changed to what we have. And with that, we are going to scope what we are doing for R3, right? And probably, I mean, given that you are the host, but at least maybe we should put some time on what are we planning to do for these meetings, right? Because at some point we need to get a scope get some content for R3 in place, right? And okay, I'll leave it like that.
If I can add my thoughts on that, at least my understanding when the meeting was proposed, it was going to be a 50-50 split between architecture and release scope. Hence the split on this agenda here to look at the GitHub issue and some of the outstanding comments around the discussion that we had last week. Now, last week the discussion went nearly 100% on the architecture stuff. But then I haven't seen Sudi's proposal, but I assume that Sudi's proposal is at least somewhat aligned with what you're looking at. And maybe Sudi, I think you're in the call, you can comment on that. Is what Vim is looking at, which is, I guess, about release planning and taking user stories and the flow into the...
Yeah, no, I think Vim, I fully agree with your comment there. In that proposal, I'm at least like suggesting how, like a framework for what are the key priorities to think about for R3, and also how over the say like next 2 weeks we can come back with which user stories we should prioritize. And we have multiple working groups, so we probably will never work through it if we review all the user stories in this meeting. So what I proposed is a theme for the release, and based on the theme, each working group to then like suggest user stories that we should discuss in the next meeting. At least that's like the essence of what I was proposing there, but we can discuss.
Yeah, let's go through it. I don't want to derail the meeting. Let's go through it, and we can always come back to it.
Yeah. And Kiran, I actually have a conflict in the last like 15-20 minutes. Is it possible that I go first on the release scope?
Well, I was just going to suggest that we maybe if there is a relative importance on the release scope for the next release, that we should probably do that anyway, just to give it the time. And if you've got a conflict, then let's do that.
Okay.
So I'll let you take over the sharing.
We'll need. Yeah, I haven't like poured over all the user stories. I'm still ramping up into the work of SIG1 and like trying to understand what's the work that's already done. So I don't have like detailed like recommendations on user stories or whatever in the scope. I was more like summarizing the discussion I had with Alexi and Sana on like how we can go about this. So I see it as a shorter discussion for today, but let me go ahead and share the thinking.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, let me know if you can see the screen. I'm assuming it works.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So basically, I just have like I summarized it in like 2 sections, right? Like what are the overarching release goals and like what's the approach we should take, like a really simple summary. One of the things that we have done with R1 and R2 is like really establish the platform, the Nephew platform, as well as focused a lot on the NF LCM. So one of the reflections that I had just as a thematic is we should continue to build the platform and also expand to like if from the beginning in Nephew, we had these three pillars, the infra automation, the NFLCM, and the NF configuration. So to kind of expand towards that full scope. From Google, we have an interest to contribute in the infra automation swim lane, right? So that's something that we can contribute. I know in the community there is a lot of energy around ORAN, so that's like a further kind of expansion. In the first two releases, it's been 5G core, and now expanding into RAN with alignment with ORAN makes a lot of sense. So basically continuing to realize some of the user stories, at least on the ORAN side. There is also discussion like we are having like jointly with Ericsson, like, and also like other community members in the space, so we can definitely explore that area. And the second one, as I mentioned, is kind of expanding and like adding the infra automation building block into this. And then third one, as more and more applications are now coming with 5G core and RAN, and in the last NIFIO summit, there was a lot of interest from some of the enterprise applications as well, right? So in order to kind of really realize the NIFIO automation platform ambition, to kind of prioritize some of the SDK kind of work in R3 will set us a platform for many of these applications to be onboarded, right? Like, so to kind of simplify the user experience. So at least this was my first proposal. And of course, I'm sure people have a lot of ideas to further iterate on it, right? Like, so from a thematic perspective, that's something that I just wanted to put on the table. And in terms of approach, we had two releases last year. I mean, the R2 is coming this month, but still it's approximately two release cadence. I think it's important we commit as community to continue to maintain that cadence. Probably the lesson from R2 is that maybe we should plan better around the holidays and maybe aim to have a release in June and November as a proposal, instead of keeping it in December, which kind of runs into holidays and like things slow down.
So just Tim has his hand up. I don't know if you want to take comments now or do you want to take them at the end?
No. Finish at the end. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm pretty much done anyways, right? So on the release cadence, I would like to suggest that we continue to maintain the two releases per year. And in terms of actually finalizing the scope and the thematic, for each of these, pretty much there is a sub working group ongoing, right? Like at least for the SDK and for the ORAN, there is already working group. So what I propose is basically in the next meeting on the Jan 26th, these working groups should decide which user stories are recommended to be prioritized for R3, a candidate, right? Like there can be more than one, and present it in the next Friday meeting. And in that meeting, we can then agree on a draft set of user stories that we would go after with R3. We could also, if we have more user stories and more scope that is larger for R3, we could also start putting candidates in R4, right? Like that's typically how we should build roadmaps. It's almost like a roadmap building exercise. So instead of just thinking as an R3, we should think of the user stories that we want to touch in 2024 and then like distribute them into R3 and R4. That way we are kind of getting ahead a little bit on the R4 as well, right? So that's at least from an approach point of view what I wanted to bring to the table, and like suggest a thematic on some of the top priorities. Open for discussion. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure I understand, because particularly on the ORAN side, I mean, we spent, oh my goodness gracious, probably 2 months now or more, going through setting objectives of what we want to do for release 3, defining identifying a set of user stories, and now filling out the user stories, and then building the artifacts that are needed for network automation. So my question is that what are we doing with this? What is it? What is the purpose of what you want to accomplish with this piece of it, right? who's going to consume it, and for what purpose are we doing?
I see Kieran and Wim have their hands up as well. My quick reflection is that we should definitely use that as part of now. Maybe it's not clear in what I was proposing there, but we should really take those user stories and finalize the R3 scope on what we want in the R3 scope, depending on the community capacity that we could deliver those user stories.
So, but you're not going to want, so like I have a list of user stories, there's 6 of them that are, that we try, or we're going to try to do for release 3. We have, I'm not sure.
There is a background noise, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that was me, I think.
Ben,
Sorry.
Okay, so so we have we have a set of user stories, right? Not, I don't know at this meeting if you, I don't think you want to go into the minutiae of each of the user stories, but what we're trying to accomplish with the user stories for sure. And I think from the group, at least what I would think that from this group, I would want confirmation that there's a commitment in terms of resources that would allow for that user story to be done, right? And those things that aren't committed, then obviously we backlog. But I'm just trying to figure out. So we're going to bring all our user stories from all these groups, and we're going to make soup out of them, right? If you will, right? Each one of them's ingredients, and maybe there's too many for a release, and we have to bring some stuff back. But I don't know if I want to go in and actually go to the details of reviewing, the minutia of each user story.
Agree. I think we should, in this meeting, at least my proposal is we review the user stories that this ORAN working group for suggests are the priority for R3. And that I think we should prioritize at a user story level, right? Like the assumption in this meeting would be that the user stories were already reviewed and like agreed upon in the working group.
Okay, thank you.
Ben, do you want to?
Yeah, so I have 2 things, but yeah, so on this discussion, my view is this, right? Is that I think the user stories are done in my view, or should be done, right? What I think is important to do in this meeting is that we want to realize those user stories, right? So that means that we need to do this and we add that and blah, 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 right? So there's a bunch of stuff that we need. We need to check, can we test it? Do we do this and that and that? So my view is we should discuss here the implications of that user story on and how we evolve what we have from R2 towards R3 and define at least roughly the components that are going to be, let's say, or not in the, I don't want to say exactly this component, we are going to do this change, but at least that we have a rough idea of the impact and the changes that are going to be needed to reflect those use cases. And based on that, we can define some, let's say, scope of and activities, and we know what type of elements are involved. And based on that, we can then see in the community who's willing to contribute and whether they are willing to sign up to deliver that in a given time frame. And they don't have to be, this not is exact math, but at least to have a rough view on that. And as a result, that's how we have done so far, more or less, the scoping of a given release these days. And somehow we have to get to that level, I think, or at least that's my perspective.
Yep.
I think that largely aligns with my perspective. I think, but I don't think it goes against anything you've said in this presentation, Sudhi. I think I like the idea of a theme to kind of give the community a kind of a set of goals that we want to try and achieve in a particular release. Because if you're going to have iterative releases, it's nice to sort of say that you've got some kind of target that you're aiming for in that time frame. But I think what I'm hearing is from Tim and from Vim, we already have a backlog of requirements that are coming through the pipe at the minute from the different working groups. And probably at some point we need to sit down and pull that list together into one big list and then build an anatomy out of that to show the dependencies and to show the impacts of each of those on each of the components. And then I guess plan the work in that order somehow. I don't know if that, I presume that's this meeting, and maybe that's where
Yep.
we need to spend that time. Maybe the next few meetings need to be focused on that aspect rather than the architectural aspect for the short term. I don't know.
I fully agree. My intention with proposing a theme is to make sure we have a balanced set of features built in the release. Otherwise, it's possible we unintentionally focus on one area and miss other important area. So I just wanted kind of a forest for the trees view with the thematic. But then, for example, I think next meeting we should like dive deep on ORAN user stories and come to a conclusion on which of them we want to go with in R3. And in the following meeting, we should look at like if we agree on thematic, like an SDK user stories, and then finalize that. And then in like 2-3 meetings, we would have finalized the set of user stories for R3.
Hey, so one of the things we're missing out of this thing, Sudhi, so if we do that, I know that there's, the work that going to free GPT, but the service assurance team has been doing, as well as the observability framework. So I think we need to make sure that somehow that's listed as part of the overall enhancements on the pillars, right? So I don't see you have it there, but
yeah. No, yeah, definitely. I don't at all claim that it's exhaustive. So I sent the link here in the chat. My hope would be that we can all collaborate and like finalize that theme, right, over the next few days. That way we can make sure we are addressing all those dimensions of the theme in the following meetings.
but the overall stuff you want to keep, this piece of it, you want to keep it terse. Is that correct? It's basically a one slider of what we're doing. Right? Is that accurate? So what I liked about, like, if you looked at the TNC report and you looked at what we did in release 2, it had, here's the new features and here's the technical debt we worked on, right? And it was pretty clear, right?
Yes.
And I was hope that that's what we're doing, except instead of doing it in the back end, we're doing it in the front end, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's my intention here, to have like a overarching view across the working groups. That way we can effectively prioritize and do it intentionally in accordance with the theme that we all agree on.
Just in terms of the order, I think Tal was next in the comments. Oh, you took your hand out again, Tal.
Oh, hi, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to express confusion here. So this is supposed to be the work group for scope and roadmap, right? That is the work group 3. Sorry, scope and user stories. This is so confusing, right? The invite says scope and architecture, but architecture is owned by work group 1, right? So we're, as I understood, this work group, number 3, was supposed to be about, well, our main meetings got to be too overloaded only with scoping. And we said, well, let's put this as a separate task force. People will work on scope and user stories. And then we can come and kind of finalize it in the main meeting of SIG 1. So I'm really confused about what's happening. The invite says that it's about architecture, but I thought that would be a different work group.
I think there was a challenge in timing and availability of people, Tal, in that because Alexei and Sana are both down as the kind of the interim leaders of this working group and the architecture working group, and because I presume it's tricky to find time slots for everything, they put this meeting as a joint working group 1, working group 3 meeting.
Okay.
So 50% of it on architecture, 50% on RX scope and user stories.
Okay, I understand. So then I don't understand why Sudi said that the user stories won't be done here, that they would be done elsewhere. Isn't this exactly the space where we zero in on user stories?
No, I don't think that's not what I meant, Tal. Not every user, I mean, given the amount of time that we have in this meeting, half an hour, it's just realistically not possible that we address every user story that comes across all the working groups. So my suggestion is that we filter the prioritized user stories, let the working groups decide, and then we further review across the working groups according to the theme that we agree and finalize those, right? So it's kind of working towards a roadmap in this meeting. In this meeting, if we only spend time on user stories, we will never have a roadmap.
Well, user stories is a job that starts and ends, right? Once you capture it, it's done. It doesn't have to be ongoing, right? Unless you want to keep developing them. But if that's the case, then who generates the user stories? So I know we have a group on service assurance, but they'll be generating user stories for service assurance. But who will design the architecture for user stories generally, right? I thought this would be the working group, but it seems that other people feel it's not.
I feel it is, but I
Yeah,
don't
so
think
maybe-
Sudi said that it wasn't either.
Separate things. At least my intention was only around how do we get to a roadmap, right? Like doesn't take away what other things that need to happen in this meeting. I don't own this meeting, right? So
Okay.
my proposal here is mainly about how can we go from all the things that we are working on and like come to a roadmap on that, right? But there can be more things that this meeting will accomplish.
Can I go, Kieran? Or
Yes, please, Wim, go ahead, and then I'll go.
See, ideally, in my view, this is what I would like to see in the meeting. I think the people have worked on the user stories, right? So in my view, that job is done, or at least for the most part is done. What I think we need to do in this meeting is say, okay, to realize this user story, right? I'm going to, for example, because I think some of the use cases in RAM require more, let's say, stuff on cluster and infra and stuff like that, right? So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to add, or I'm going to make a CR for the workload cluster, and it's going to derive these type of attributes from it, and we are going to use this to instantiate it, and that, right? So, and you come with a proposal of how that would look like, and we say, okay, that looks good. Let's based on that, we cover user story 1, 5, and 6, right? Okay, next one. Do we have people to work on it? Or we don't even need to discuss that yet. So we at least know these are the building blocks. And we do the same thing for a number of these things. And all of a sudden, I think we see that this is consistent, because one of the challenges that you sometimes have, if the implications of the user story conflict, or would have the same building blocks, but people have a different view on it, we can try to align it and stuff like that. And all of a sudden now you can start implementing and delivering and have people working on these items. That's how I would like to see this meeting. And so my goal is not to go through the user stories here, but my goal is someone comes with a proposal on how what artifacts will be needed or needs to be changed to accommodate for that particular user story. And you come with that prepared to this meeting, you're discussing it, and then if there is an agreement, you move forward, right? And let's go with it. Does it make sense or not?
I think that line, I was going to speak next, I think, in the queue. So, and I think that sounds reasonable to me. I think what we have is user stories that are coming in from the other working groups, Tim's working group and the assurance working group and so on, that if we put them all in a big list, then we can sort of draw that architecture and sort of see which of those user stories impact what aspects and how they overlap with each other. I think that's more or less what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm happy to work offline because see, I think we have to come prepared to this meeting, right? So we are not going to put it here. So we somehow need to prepare it, or at least, and probably various people need to prepare it, and they come with a proposal to accomplish that. And I think so if some people can basically say, okay, I'm going to do this and this work. I mean, we can split it based on the working groups that we have, right? So we can use ORAN, and maybe we don't do all 6, or I don't know how many you have these days, Tim. But that's up to the people to decide, and then that we use as a way to accomplish that. Does that make sense? So I like just come prepared, and people present, and then we discuss, and then we'll take it from there.
I think Ravi was next.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I missed the last meeting, but my understanding of this meeting was that is twofold, right? One is to come up with a consistent view of the system architecture, because now the user stories, that template itself, we've added several more sections that goes just not at the user kind of high level kind of use case, but also a lot of design aspects that needs to be captured, and the things and the additional artifacts that you need to make it kind of realizable, right? So in that sense, I mean, of course, the first piece needs to be addressed. The second one was, I tried to lean towards what Wim was trying to say. It's good to kind of have it a forum where you can actually make the decision. But my concern is that how do you kind of make a decision, in the sense, how do you build that roadmap, considering that you have dependencies with other forums or other external sources here, because with ORAN, something like the ORAN use cases we are talking about, something happening in the OSC, bringing it in, and so on. So it seems to be a little bit open-ended if you're saying that, in that sense. But if you want to make it more concrete and say that, okay, we need to time bound this, and I don't know how you're going to pick those use cases, considering these external factors.
If I may respond quickly or not?
Go for it.
Okay. So yeah, so Ravi, it's a good point. So external dependencies are to be discussed as well, right? Because if we say, okay, in order to realize this, we are depending on this component, then we have to discuss it, because we had the same thing actually for R1 and R2 somehow, lesser for R1, because I saw some people had prepared it, but Free 5GC and OAI were also external dependencies, if you will, right? And so as a result, I think Sagar did it, and then Steven, and then some other people for Free 5GC had worked on it in the past, so we had the knowledge, right? So that external dependencies is definitely a very important aspect. And if it's unknown, but we should try to clarify who could basically then take the lead or see whether that dependency is realistic or not. So that doesn't mean that we have to decide in that meeting, but at least we should take an action to see who is going to be our, let's say, liaison to realize that dependency or inform us about that dependency or whatsoever. So we don't have to potentially resolve it in that meeting, but at least if we know that we have a dependency, we can at least know what our, let's say, dependencies are, and so on and so forth, right? And people have various views on that, on how to deal with it, and hopefully we can move forward based on that. But dependencies is definitely important.
Yes, yeah. Because I think that particularly with ORAN, I see the use case is a little bit more complex. With something like, you're trying to realize, like, the NFO, the FOCOM, the OCloud and all, and exactly, how do you kind of validate this and so on. So anyway, so I think there's a lot more I would say from an ORAN perspective, the use cases, but I think those have to be identified in the use cases, the external dependencies and the timelines on which they can be addressed. So yeah.
Sure. Okay, Tim, and then I'm going to call maybe a vote amongst the attendees to see whether we want to continue this discussion or whether we want to pivot to the architecture discussion.
All right, so just real clear, because again, what I can go this from the ORAN, right? We develop the use cases, and we are working on the architectural or the network automation request for the 4 deliverables that I think Wim is referring to, that we would then have to come to this meeting if we decide that this is the meeting to have that. I don't care. I can bring that as the use cases are complete those other tasks, right? We can come in and have a discussion. If that's what you're asking for, women, is that what you're asking? I just want to make sure that I'm prepared for what this group wants to do in these meetings, right? So, Wim, if indeed you want to talk about the use cases from the the deliverables of the network automation requested 4 different pieces, we can do that. I just don't have I don't have them ready. They weren't supposed to be ready until the first.
Well, I mean, we will make them ready whenever we are ready, right? So, but
right.
What I'm proposing is that the let's say deliverables that we have to accomplish eventually, let's say in our 3-ish time frame, or in between our 3 and our 4, right? Because for us, nothing is really 100% set in stone, right? So we built a roadmap, and then okay, hopefully we can deliver upon it. But okay, it's open source, so that you would never have 100% guarantee that that this is possible, right? But at least we get a sense of the people in the team that this is achievable. So and we have to at some point come to that let's say shared view of such a plan or whatever we call it, right?
Right. So, so my point is that if that's what the group decides to do, I can do that. But it's going to have to dribble in one use case at a time.
Yeah.
Probably
no, and we can do it use case, but sometimes you could see from an architecture point of view, okay, if we add this component, we can do use case X, Y, and Z, right? I maybe just give maybe 1 or 2 minutes. I'll explain what we did, for example, in R2, to give you a sense, right? In R2, we decided, okay, so OAI is going to be needed, right? Okay, we need an operator to control it, right? So we had to then do some changes in the management cluster, in some initially not in the specialization pipeline, but there were some attributes that we had to do. We decided to try to do multi-vendor, so it has some impact on some CRD, some specialization things. And all of a sudden we knew, okay, these people were going to work on this, these people are going to work on that, and so on. And we said, okay, we need to do a change. So based on all of these things, we decided, okay, here is a rough idea on all the components that we need, and then we started working on it. That's kind of how I view what we need to accomplish at some point. And sooner than later, if you will, because the longer you wait with let's say a deadline, if you will, that we have, the chances of adding it is smaller. But we set our target for end of January, right? So which is not so far away.
Okay, I tried to capture some of the points here, and I think Barada, you put some comments in the chat. I think I've kind of captured that here. So first of all, I captured that we said this is a working group 1 architecture, working group 3 RX scope meeting. The proposal is to have working group leads bring requirements to review once they've been through the working group analysis phase, and the meeting should consider how they align with the themes of the release and any interdependencies between the user stories, as well as external dependencies to highlight risks. Am I missing anything from that, or?
So I don't think that's what we're saying, though.
Is it not?
No, hold it. We're talking about the user stories. What Wim wants, what Wim wants to do is take the user story and the network automation artifacts that all the people that are doing user stories are developing, and review those together, right? Now, from that, we could be documenting an architecture thing for release 3, but it's not, we're not building a roadmap, guys, here. Correct me if I'm wrong, we're not, there's no roadmap here. This is trying to figure out what the impacts for release 3 are.
Yes, but to a certain extent, you build a roadmap inherently with that, right? So the roadmap is a result of that exercise somehow, right?
Yeah, once you've
But
got the
first of all,
dependencies
just to be clear-
identified, you know you need to do X
Yeah.
before you do Y. That's kind of implicitly a roadmap.
Yeah, and then from that you can derive a team, or we can validate that we accomplish. Are we accomplishing the team based on those artifacts that we deliver, right? So they're all related somehow, in my view.
Yeah, I'd be careful with the word roadmap, because I think Sudi might think a roadmap's a little bit different than roadmap.
But
All
I
you're doing
think,
is just pushing some technical debt, maybe.
Well, that
no,
do.
but the first thing what I'm trying to do, in my view, is scope, right? Is trying to understand the components and the scope, right? Then the next thing is, okay, we will ask people who are going to work on it. So you get a sense, okay, that's achievable, right? So, okay, now then, as a result of it, if you know that these are the work items, you know more or less the roadmap, and you know more or less the scope, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's not that clean cut, but okay.
It's not black and white. I understand. I'm making a bit, but I'm talking about the flow somehow, because they are somehow related. But I think the first important element is the scope somehow, right? Is that we understand what is it that we are going to change or add or do, and then as a result, you also know the people working on it, and then you can define more or less when we can do stuff, and all of a sudden you have it. Okay, I'll shut up.
It's a bit of a semantic discussion as well. Just before we bring in Tal, and I'm not sure whether Tal or Tim was up first, but a point of order, are we okay to continue this discussion and leave the architecture discussion and review of the comments on that to another time, or do we want to pivot? I think
it seems to me we have to finalize this, get at least an understanding between us.
Right. I would agree. If anybody has any other issues with that, then otherwise I propose we continue. If you want to go ahead, Tal.
Yeah, I'm thinking that we might have too many work groups here. I feel like architecture, user stories, and roadmap are all interrelated. So it did make sense to create this meeting that joins those together, because architecture is very much tied to scope, right? So I think to me, it would make sense just to have a work group on scope. And it could include architecture and user stories, because those obviously relate. Roadmap, though, is a curious one for me. I'm really concerned about us doing roadmaps release by release. The 6-month cadence has been very painful for us, for the other SIGs. Right? If we create a roadmap and we keep telling ourselves, yes, the roadmap is R3 plus, right? We don't expect everything to be in R3, but it still seems to me like we're planning a release. We're planning a product and trying to decide, what's going to be included and what isn't, right? In terms of scope. Scoping to me is scope of the product as a whole, the project. It's not scoping of a specific release. If we want to move to a more continuous design and development cadence, which I think most of us seemed open to, then we're doing the opposite of that. We're doing something very waterfall here. And probably we'll need to do a little bit of waterfalling at some points, right, to design specific features. But tying those features to specific releases has been painful. So what we're trying to do, I think, generally is improve the connection between SIG 1 and the other SIGs. The other SIGs depend on SIG 1 to create the scope and user stories, so we know exactly what we're working on, what's in scope and what isn't on scope, because we're trying to run a tight ship, right? We don't want to create a project that just includes absolutely everything, right? And that's part of why we created Nefio Experimental. So, if there is work going on, we don't want to block it. We want to let it to continue, but continue maybe outside of the main project so that we can maintain our focus. Right. So I guess if the goal of everything, if the keyword here is focus, then what we're doing is losing focus a little bit in my view. I think we just have too many moving parts here, and I think we should just join them together. So I don't know if what I'm saying is helpful at all, because I'm saying that we're not doing it right. but I am suggesting maybe we can do it better by uniting these different discussions under one. But then I know we were feeling overwhelmed with everything we need to do, but I think that's okay. I think if we just keep hammering on it, there will be progress. Anyway, those are my 2 cents on the matter.
I tried to capture that as we need to differentiate between scope versus roadmap, which covers construction line timing. I think your point on, I don't know how to precisely capture your point on release by release planning versus just building a roadmap and then continuously iterating on that. I think that's more of a philosophical debate around do we have time-based releases that have whatever content has been done by that stage, and we aim to have product quality that is, you know, potentially releasable at any point? Or
I guess I'm trying to say here that the word roadmap should be emergent. That is, if we create user stories in architecture, and with the knowledge that those keep evolving, right? It's an ongoing discussion. Modeling as well, right? The other work groups, our models will evolve. When we have those and more focus, then the roadmap just becomes, well, what do the other SIGs think we can achieve by certain releases, right? And what would be the order of attacking the different items, right? And we're a volunteer force, right? So people will work on what they're passionate and care about working on, right? So the roadmap itself will emerge, I think, from all SIGs together saying what they can do by a certain date. That's what I think. That's an agile roadmap, right? But I think we have to be very careful about creating a waterfall roadmap, which seems to be what some of us are doing, which at least so far hasn't worked well for us. That's the point I'm trying to make.
So my understanding from the discussion that we had so far was that a logical next step would be to try and bring together what the other working groups have been working on to date into one list of things that we would like to achieve, building a sort of an anatomy between them to see, well, this working group came up with this idea for something they want to build, this other working group came up with that idea. How do those interrelate with each other? Are there dependencies? Are they aiming towards the same goal? Are they conflicting with each other, and so on? And then building that sort of that anatomy will then inform to a certain extent the construction order, as will whoever wants to work on that. You know, you can only do A, you can only do B before you can't do B before you do A, if you know what I mean. That sort of backlog would emerge from that, and then, as you say, Tal, I think whatever organizations or individuals are willing to work on whichever aspects of the system will kind of define what gets prioritized for a particular release. But that backlog should be probably not release specific, but more sort of showing the dependencies. Did that make any sense?
It makes sense to me. I think we could start and see how things go. I think everybody put their concerns, aired their concerns here in this meeting. Yeah, I think, as you said, this is getting a little philosophical. I think if we can just start moving ahead and see what happens, and as the concerns come up, we can address them. I don't know.
So the challenge, the fact that we don't have a process or a way forward here is actually, or that we don't have an aligned view, is going to at the moment slow us down, I think, right? Because this is actually a very important aspect in my view. How we get to scope stuff, right, and get things in motion. And yeah, and that should be clear to everyone, in my view, because otherwise it's hard to make progress. And that's why I think it's important to get at least a view on and get a consensus on a way forward, right? And take it from there and then improve from there, right? So it doesn't mean that it has to stay like that. But if we can, because see, we delivered release 2 more or less, right? I think there are some people who said, okay, let's now start working on the release 3. So how do they get started? Is basically the question.
So we have. Sorry, go ahead, Tal.
I wanted to suggest maybe we need to write down a paragraph that's our charter for the working group 3. Sorry, working group 1. No, we're well both, right? But
1 on 3.
yeah, I think both of those working groups need a clear charter over what their responsibility is. It doesn't have to be a huge document, just like a paragraph for each to make sure what they own. And you know, different. We're definitely the same people are involved in different work groups, but in terms of just clarifying when you meet for a purpose, what that functional purpose is. So I am agreeing with Wim. You know, I think we need clarity here. So when we come to a meeting, we know what we're trying. Excuse me, what we're trying to achieve.
Okay. So we have 12 minutes left. For next week, do we want to set a concrete next steps? Do we want to see if maybe talking to Alexi and Sana and others, we could work on that charter next offline or collaboratively between now and next week and then review it? Or do we want to proactively bring together a list of the existing user stories that have already been written by the existing working groups and just try and see what happens when we go through those here in this meeting and put them in some kind of a, I don't know, backlog or something?
And maybe propose that we raise it in the Monday meeting next week, right? Because that's where the overall SIG one is. So let's raise it there. Not because that's basically the next working day. And then discuss what would be the scope of the Friday meeting. What are we trying to accomplish? Because I also hear from Tim that he is not ready yet. Or am I? Did I not get it right?
I got a couple that I can start dribbling in. I don't have them all 6 of them done.
Oh, correct. So, but that's okay, right?
Yeah, that's what I said. I could dribble them into you, right? But
yeah, which is okay.
I think a pipe cleaner would be good as well, just to kind of see, is there enough information? Are we collecting the right level of data? Are we, you know, because I don't know, I've seen a lot of these discussions happen in the individual working groups, but maybe having some kind of external eyes on it would be good. I don't know what you think, Tim.
well, that was the intent, right? That was the intent, was that we were supposed to do the second part of this stuff. You know, there's 4 items, and then we were to get a hold of the network automation team to present what we wanted. But we didn't want to do that while they were trying in mid-release of release 2, because you know they're busy, right? You know, so that's why we picked February, right? Because you had the other release was supposed to be out for the most part. And so it was a perfect time to discuss. If we use this meeting for it, or we set up I just need to figure out where you guys want to talk about.
Yeah, but I think I saw maybe, sorry, I didn't raise my hand, but so let's maybe clarify what we are trying to accomplish that next Friday, right? But if we go to the user stories, right, maybe it's good to then indicate which one we are going to focus upon so that people can come prepared, right? So that they can review them ahead of time. I would like to at least have a good review of it so that I understand it, and then it would make the meeting way more efficient, I hope. Or maybe we have maybe even more inefficient if there is too many questions. But those questions should be resolved before the meeting, in my view. We should try to make progress on understanding the implications of the use case rather than questioning the use case. If that makes sense. Because it doesn't make sense if the use case gets presented, let's say, it doesn't make sense to have 10 questions about the use case, that means that we are not prepared, right? Because then we're using the meeting to understand the use case, which is basically what the working group is supposed to be doing.
So I guess, Wim, you're saying we should have that list circulated a couple of days beforehand, and
Yes,
people should make sure to have read it and provided feedback on it beforehand.
that would be my proposal, because otherwise, see, we don't have a lot of time. We have too many meetings, in my view. So if we then use the meeting to try and learn what the use case is, then we are not using our time in the most appropriate way, in my view, right? So there's no point in. So we should discuss. We should try to move forward. So in other words, what for me is moving forward is to, get a view on the implication and the scope and stuff like that, right? So that should be then. If that's what we agreed upon, then that should be the focus. And because if we spend 30 minutes of the time people asking questions about the use case, then we are not making progress, in my view, right?
Yeah, I'll just try to capture that there. Does that capture what you're saying?
Wait. 2 days beforehand, the group should provide comments offline. Yeah. I would say the goal of the meeting is not to understand the use case. The goal of the meeting is to understand the implication of the use case.
Right. So, and also, Saren, so what we can do is that as a use case is ready for impact analysis, okay, that we can just, that all we have to do is on Slack and the network architecture team say this use case is ready for impact analysis. I would expect the team lead for working group 1, 3, whatever this is, just to put that on its list for review, right? That way we know which 2 are there. It's been announced. We know what's going in, and allow you guys, you or Alexis, whichever one, to schedule what makes sense, right, for that next meeting. So we feed you when it's ready.
Yeah.
You schedule it. My point.
Yeah, that's also good. Yeah, that's a good proposal.
That gives everyone, people know what's ready, and then they know what's scheduled, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Okay. That sounds like a plan. So the 2 actions I see coming out of this, we have a need for a charter for working group 1, working group 3. We'll raise that on Monday. And then for next Friday, we want to start reviewing some specific user stories in order to, I need to stop calling them use cases and mixing my terms up. So
and maybe give a caveat to it, Kieran, because if people disagree on that way of working, then this might not hold, right? But
it is a proposal,
yeah,
and see how it goes, or experiment. Is that what you mean? Or
yeah, so what I'm trying to say is that, okay, this is now discussed a little bit amongst the people here, but maybe some other people have a different perspective on the goal of this meeting, right? And then that scope will, or that content might change, is what I'm trying to say. I'm hoping not, but yeah, we are not the owners, and yeah, we need other votes. We have very limited people right now on the call, right? Maybe people have completely different views.
so maybe we say we can bring this to SIG 1 on Monday as a proposal to ratify as well.
Correct. So this would be a proposal on what we could discuss on a Friday meeting, right? And that can lead to input to the charter if we agree. Now, it could also, what I'm trying to say is that this input might be not agreed upon, which means that this is void. Do I make myself clear?
Yeah, I mean,
maybe not.
You mean Alexei and Sana might disagree with the proposal?
Disagree.
And want,
correct.
Yeah. Okay, correct. That's fine. No, I think so. So what we'll say is we'll bring these 2. I'll ping Alexei in the Slack afterwards, and we'll just say these are the 2 things that we would like to discuss as a proposal for an overall need for the working group 1 and working group 3, and for specific things that we'll do next week in order to drive the planning for the next release and future releases forward.
Agree. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. I know there's been a lot of stuff in the chat.
Karen,
oh,
so
sorry, yeah.
the way we're doing it, I want to make sure. I think the best way of saying the work that Wim's referring to is we're doing impact analysis of the use cases, right? That way we're not reviewing the use case. We're simply doing an impact analysis of the use case for scope and resource architectural purposes.
User story.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
By the way, Ravi has his hands up.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Ravi, and then I think we
So just a confirmation of the timeline, because what I think we've been discussing in working group 2 is end of January being the deadline for those use cases to be complete. So I'm assuming everybody has that timeline in mind. So, and we are talking about start reviewing next Friday. I mean, are we ready with some of the use case stories? Just checking on the timeline. And do we want a timeline by which all the use case stories have to be completed, considering R3 scope?
We've already said that, Ravi, right? We've said this was last time. The goal is the end of January. Now, if we can't accomplish that, well, say la vie, right?
So now, I guess next Friday. Go ahead.
It's end of January. Sorry.
What's that? Go ahead, Wim.
Next Friday is basically the end of is the last week, Friday meeting of January. So I was going to say that is the last week of it. But just to make it clear, I'm of the impression we will probably need more than one meeting, right? So there will be. So if it comes the week after or the week after that, is not the end of the world, right? So what I'm trying to say is that I think next week is the end of January, is the last Friday of January. But also I think I try to, what we said is if I indicate which one could be discussed, and then we take those, right? And hopefully there is more than 0.
Yeah, I know. I mean, next Friday would mean we need something to be shared probably early, like by Wednesday or something then. So I'm assuming that it'll be like after January into February. So that was my impression. Okay. Just trying to clarify that. That's all.
But maybe the end of January really is the 31st of January, which is next, is maybe just over a week and a half away. So you could even say we can get some user stories ready for review next Wednesday so that they can be reviewed in this fashion by Friday, and then other user stories can come in the following Wednesday for review the following Friday, and we're still within the letter of that rule, even if we're not within the spirit of it.
Yeah. Plus we can use next week as a dry run, right? So it might also be good, right? Because it's the first time we do it. And I think, we are open source, right? So we don't have a hard deadline anyhow. And given that we have 3 or 4 working groups or maybe more, right? So don't expect this all to happen in one meeting. This is going to take a few, in my view.
And I think we're going to start seeing this as a kind of I would hope we'd see it as a more continuous process as we go.
Yes.
So that hopefully as we get into some kind of regular cadence, we can have user stories that are coming through on a weekly or monthly basis, and then they just get planned in. Okay.
Correct. I agree. Sorry.
It's top of the hour. I think it was a good discussion. Hopefully my notes here have captured what we wanted to communicate back out of this group, and I'll as I say, I'll drop this to Alexi, and we'll try and get it on the agenda to bring up on Monday. Any last comments?
Yeah, Kiran, I put a word there that even SIG2, SIG3 members need to be here.
Yeah, okay. So that should be part of the charter, probably.
And I thought that was always discussed, right? Because the timeline was always discussed there was a request on SIG2, at least SIG3. I'm not 100% sure, but at least on SIG2. That's why I'm making a priority personally for this meeting because of this. So,
yeah.
But I 100% agree.
You are SIG all, Wim. You are SIG
No,
or
no,
SIG.
no. I mean, but I do agree there should be more participation in general. The problem is it's a Friday meeting.
Yeah, 6 p.m. here in Ireland. It's
7
probably even
p.m.
later in lots of other places. Yeah. Okay. Any last comments?
Thanks, Kieran, for holding it. Good discussion.
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate, Kiran.
Okay, thanks, guys. Have a good weekend, and chat to you next week.